We've already covered the basics of lesson planning, so now look at some of the more, not necessarily complicated, but more advanced tools you can use to divide your lesson up. Remember that the body of your lesson, or the outline, which we did on the previous video, is generally the most difficult part for students to do, or for adult students who are learning how to work in schools to do, as far as planning a 1 hour lesson. So there are some more interesting ways that you can learn to divide lessons up to keep students interested. For example, we could decide that we're going to do some individual pair group, possibly even some whole class work, depending on the size of your class and what your job is. Students can work on their own for 10 minutes reading something silently, for example. Then they may spend 20 minutes working in pairs doing an activity, and then they may work in small groups. If you're taking a group of students, say 10 students for literacy, that might be an interesting way to once a week structure a lesson to keep students interested, instead of having the same old routine all of the time. And of course, if your topic is how to make sandwiches, you could then do, how am I going to teach that in 1 hour, by doing a little bit of individual work? Okay, they're going to read some theory on it. How are we going to do that doing some pair work? Well, students are both going to be cutting up the meat and all the vegetables and stuff like that. And then as a group, we're going to sit around and all taste test and rate each other, or something like that. The other option you've got is what we call student-centred or teacher-centred. Teacher-centred doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher, it's usually any adult, I suppose. Adult-centred. Student-centred means the students are doing all the work, they're doing the research, they're learning themselves, they're going through, for example, a worksheet, or they're doing internet research, or they're doing a science experiment, or they're playing with the sandwich and making their sandwich. As opposed to teacher-centred, which is more like modelling or lecturing, where the teacher is doing, or the adult is making the sandwich and showing students exactly what to do. And that's a brilliant thing to do at the beginning of the lesson for the first 10 or so minutes, and then students know exactly what they expect to be able to do at the end, or after a bit of practice. And then they can go off and do the student-centred stuff later on. Another way to divide your lesson up. You could even have something of a combination, just to be a bit more confusing. Finally, you would have heard these before, they're very popular, your learning styles. Your 3 basic learning styles. You've also got things like your multiple intelligences and stuff like that, so they can get more complicated, but let's keep it simple. Your 3 learning styles: auditory, means some people learn by listening, whether it's listening to another person speaking, whether it's listening to a friend speaking. Some people learn by seeing things, visual, whether it's by watching a TV, watching a play, watching a role play, and so forth. And some people learn by tactile, touching things, playing with things. If you're teaching students how to, for example, make sandwiches, some students won't learn just by listening to you. They'll take on the most amount of information and develop their skills by actually doing it themselves. Think mechanics, for example. They're not going to learn how to fix a car by reading a book. They're going to learn by actually doing something. Okay? These are probably the most commonly used, and you could think, okay, well, if I'm doing 5 lessons a week for, say, my small literacy program, have I done all these different things? Have I covered these at least a couple of times? Because certain students learn in different ways. Some people learn visually, some auditorily, some... the other name for this, by the way, is kinesthetic. Generally, we tend to teach in the same way that we learn ourselves, which is, I suppose, a dangerous practice. In the end, at the end of the day, my advice is to do varied amounts of activities. Have a variety of things in your toolbox, because students are learning not only to learn different ways. When they go and get a job, they're not going to be able to learn their preferred way. They're going to have to learn however the information is presented. They're going to have to learn in pairs or in groups or on their own. Okay.